This is the Powered Up Podcast, show 115.
You asked about how I organize and how I engage, and there's a whole lot of Socratic discussion that I use. Not so much of what do you think is right or how do you, but do you understand this? What does this look like in your words? How well can you describe what you're taking out of this?
Welcome to a real-world education with insight and advice from teachers in the game, where current and former educators reveal what truly sets apart the great teachers and what it takes to make a positive impact on students. Whether you're in pre-service learning, new to the game, or a seasoned veteran, this is the show for you. You'll leave feeling inspired to take action because we are powering education by empowering you.
Hey, what's going on, everyone? This is Ken Erman, host of the Powered Up Podcast, and I am here with my co-host, Mr. Matt, the Ranger Rick Rogers. Matt, almost every time we have a guest come on before we start recording, you have to talk about your national park trips, which I do enjoy and love, and did not fail tonight.
I don't know. I don't know if I even said anything about my trips, did I? Not on the podcast.
Yeah, you don't even know. You don't. Not on the podcast. Just before we recorded.
I just shared that I love the state of Arizona. That's all. As I show my made from scratch, because it's not official, Ranger Rogers volunteer national park pass. I'm well, buddy. How are you?
I'm doing really well. Work's been fun. School's been fun. Things are moving and grooving right now. I'm enjoying it.
It was very cold. I'm looking forward to the weather of when this podcast actually comes out compared to the current weather, because boy, oh boy, it was a mild winter in the Northeast, but it is cold and breezy today. But speaking of planet Earth, I've got a geology riddle for you.
Okay.
Are you ready?
Mm-hmm.
So, this singular word is the most important tool. It's difficult to find, challenging to rule. It comes in many shapes and sizes, and it's often full of surprises. It's the one thing scientists need to uncover. It's the key to what they hope to discover.
This is a geology riddle?
I would open it up to say it is a science riddle.
Okay. All right. Say it one more time, because you steered me in geology, so I was hyper-focused on that.
I don't want you to be successful, so of course I'm going to throw you in.
Okay.
All right. This word is the most important tool. It's difficult to find and challenging to rule. It comes in many shapes and sizes, and it's often full of surprises. It's the one thing scientists need to uncover. It's the key to what they hope to discover.
Truth.
Ooh, not a bad guess. So the reason why I thought about this is our guest today, Ty White from Arizona, yells at us for using the word proof inappropriately, but the word that I'm referring to is evidence. And I thought, along with this riddle, evidence, when we get into that high school level, is the key that we're not necessarily determining right or wrong, but we're proving and backing up our thoughts with evidence to strengthen our opinion. And that was my main takeaway from our conversation. And we talked about a bunch of things, but Ty White, and you can kind of speak to this, is an incredible educator in a subject area that I am not great at. But I could understand how his love of learning came through and would have been successful in any subject he taught.
I 100% agree. And it's funny that using the word evidence, I think what I took away from the conversation was the evidence that he looks for in the results of students to justify the way he facilitates his classroom. And so he talks a lot about different strategies, different projects, different ways of exploring high-level science that any teacher can reflect on because he talks about the evidence of work that he sees from his students, or the evidence of performance, or the evidence of the way it changes the dynamic of his classroom to justify him continuing to use those strategies. So, I think he's using that scientific mindset, whether or not he realizes it. It was a fantastic episode, rich with conversation and just different. We haven't had a teacher like him on it ever, or at least in a long time. And so it was really neat to hear his perspective on instruction, as well as those high level science classes in the high school. So without any further delay, let's hear from Teach Better and jump right into our conversation with the 2023 Arizona Teacher of the Year, Ty White.
This podcast is a proud member of the Teach Better Podcast Network. Better today, better tomorrow, and the podcast to get you there. You can find out more at teachbetter.com/podcasts. Now let's get back to the episode.
Hi, Ty. Welcome to the Powered Up Podcast. How you doing tonight?
Great, guys. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. We're super excited to jump into this conversation with you. We've had the pleasure of having many national or state teacher of the years on our show, a lot from the 2022 class. And I am happy to say, one, congratulations, and you can share where you're from and what you won, but you are our first 2023 teacher of the year to join the show. So why don't you kick things off, officially introduce yourself, let us know where you're coming from, and give us a little snapshot of what your career in education has looked like.
Sure. So I am the 2023 Arizona Teacher of the Year. And if y'all don't mind, I want to do another plug. I'm the 2022 National Rural Education Association National Teacher of the Year. I teach chemistry in Wilcox, Arizona, which is just a small farming and ranching town down in southeast Arizona, where I teach chemistry, I apologize. But like I've taught math in the past, a little bit of earth science. My background is clearly in STEM. My master's degree is in STEM education. It's funny because as I've come into this process of meeting other teachers and teachers of the year and listening to people's stories, my story is not necessarily traditional about becoming a teacher. I went to college after high school to become a veterinarian, which at the U of A meant to major in biology with a minor in chemistry. And I ended up leaving that because my father had a work accident, and I went home to help take care of the family for a while. I was so afraid of being that guy that left school and dropped out and never went back that when I moved up to where my family had moved to the White Mountains, I stayed full-time enrolled at Northland Pioneer College at night after working my day jobs. And over time, those kind of just kept transitioning into different types of education. I was a chemistry tutor for the college, where I met people who got me involved working in charter schools. I spent 3/4 of a year in Holbrook Middle School teaching English and translating Spanish for a family that had immigrated. And so yeah, like the whole story of me becoming a teacher is, I think, a little bit different from a lot of the people I've met.
Very interesting. How do you feel? How do you feel that journey that's a little bit different has had a direct impact on the way you facilitate your high school classroom that you don't think you would do on a daily or a weekly basis with your students if you didn't have those diverse experiences?
One of the advantages I think with that I like the way you said it, that diverse experience, is that I brought a lot of different work experiences into my classroom. I'm not saying that I'm a CTE teacher, but that I regularly talk to kids about how the things we're doing in class apply to different jobs and different careers, just because I've worked a number of interesting different careers. When I'm teaching math, and I can start talking about ratios with roofing angles and things like that. It also means, and I think from that diverse experience, I like to be a lot more sensitive and aware of the needs of different kids in my classroom. It's always been a big thing of mine that those kids, and this is part of my story having grown up in Globe, but those kids that would otherwise slip through the cracks or fall out of the system, drop out, I really try to keep an eye on those kids and make sure that they're being included and seen in the class.
I mean, starting off with a background like that, I think is very, maybe not relatable, but we very much could understand the thought thought process and the feelings that go into going off to college, having dreams and aspirations, and probably the difficult decision as a young man you had to make that maybe wasn't a difficult decision because you didn't have any other choice. What was that transition like? Because it sounds like through having open perspectives and wanting to have this optimistic perspective of how you can take on other opportunities, add layer and layer of skill to your abilities, how did that really lead into the teaching career? Because you probably had a few more steps along the way before you actually solidified anything and got into the role that you're in now.
You know, it's funny because I've heard a couple different parts of that question that I felt would be interesting to address. Right, that transition is funny because it was November of my third semester, so that fall semester when my dad kind of had a phone call like, "Well, maybe you should think about coming home next semester. Maybe we miss having you around." And nobody at age 19 wants to go back home. I don't think living on their own at college, right? But I just had this sick feeling, and my stomach just felt funny. I never did register for that spring semester. I just skipped that step. And come the first week of January, my dad had his work accident, cut his hand off. So it really was kind of an interesting transition. And looking back, I mean, that's what I always point to is when I started this journey into becoming a teacher. Not that it was caused by my dad's hand coming off, but the way it changed that college trajectory. What you said, those changing plans, those changing ambitions, right?
Can you kind of add to that? So you mentioned when you worked at day and obviously studied at night to get the appropriate preparation. And it feels like you added tools to the tool belt with the tutoring and the English translation. What are some of the maybe traditional academic attributes that you had to deal with to become qualified to teach? And maybe what are some of those other features? And as well as, was it unique in any way how you actually started in the classroom, going from, I don't want to call them odd jobs, but
no, that's fair. So that first semester that I could come home, I got my mom was a teacher at Wilcox. I'm sorry, I apologize. I'm going to back that up so we can fix that. That first semester, my mom was an English teacher at Holbrook Middle School, Holbrook Junior High, and so she was the first one to tell me about that job with the English Spanish translation. And having grown up in Globe, I had a great Spanish teacher. I had friends, families that spoke Spanish, so it was just kind of something I'd learned to be able to use. I'd practice and practice with the veterinarian I worked with in high school. But after that, I was working a painting job during the summer, and I met a roofing company, and I started doing roofs during the winter until you got too icy. And it's interesting because, like I say, not just the math application there. That company I worked for was Navajo owned. It was a Navajo family that I grew to be very close with. And so again, I felt like it gave me when I got into the classroom an insight in how certain people were being left out of conversations or trying to navigate those different traditional. If they were living in a town that was the highest percentage of Caucasian I'd lived in at the time, and so they were really struggling at times to navigate some of those spaces. And getting to see that, it was something that's kind of stuck with me since then. I was doing some tutoring at the college when I met a lady who was a principal at one of the charter schools up in the White Mountains of Arizona. And she convinced me to come try out substitute teaching. So in the winter, when it was too icy to get on a roof safely, that became something else that I could do as another job on the side. And so I ended up, my very first job teaching, right, substituting, was in a kindergarten classroom. And I've got to say that, and I've said this to a lot of people before, but it bears repeating. Teachers end up where they need to be. You can't complain about teaching kindergarten. It's hugs all day. I don't know how you get anything done past that, right? I don't know how you do it, and I admire elementary and kindergarten teachers especially. But it went well enough that that charter school then offered me, an aide position at the middle school level, and by the end of that year, they brought me in as a teacher at the high school level. And it was interesting because I had, my biology studies and my chemistry studies from the U of A and from the college, so that I had some sort of background to teach the sciences like that. But looking back, it's like, not enough. And there was a number of other issues with the way that charter was run. And I don't want to sit here and harp on negatives. We know that there's challenges and some shade around some charter schools, but it was enough that it directed me that, yeah, maybe people had long told me I should be a teacher. But like I told you, my mom was a teacher. I knew that they weren't respected and they didn't get paid. I had fought against that, and so recognizing that maybe I had some skills there and that there was a need for both science teachers but also people to be culturally sensitive to the people they were teaching, I decided to go back and finish a degree in education. When I started to evaluate that, I knew that it had to be in science. That's just always been part of my identity. From the time I was a little kid, I told my family I'm going to be a scientist. And I can remember my dad telling me, "Scientists don't get paid enough. You need to think about something else." So I'm a teacher. Thanks, Dad.
Yeah, that really worked out. So I really want to jump into the way you facilitate your classroom and the activities you do with your students. But I want to ask one more thing on this topic. It's very evident that your stories are a part of you and the way you carry yourself in the classroom. What advice do you have for teachers who feel that if they shared more about themselves, it would benefit the culture of their classroom and it would benefit the relationships they have with students, but they don't know where the appropriate line is to draw. And so what advice do you have for teachers that are kind of dealing with that conundrum of how much to open up and how much to share, and what's the impact you've seen on the way it changes your relationships with students?
That's a great question. And, there's.
We're gonna throw tough ones at you all night.
Hey, I'll take it. I'll do my best. You know, Obviously you have to share, because if the kids don't know who you are, or the kids don't know how or why you became a teacher, because let's face it, this is a demanding job for not a lot of pay. Everyone's got their own reasons for being a teacher, but I think it almost always comes back to just how much you care. If the kids don't get that, then you're going to have a hard time connecting with them. The kids have to hear you. Ju- it's hard to say justify, but the kids have to hear why you care about them to really believe that you do. Um, I'm not going to say that there's not a line there, because on the one hand, it depends on what your comfort level is. I think there are some clear lines, things you shouldn't do that are just fully inappropriate. And I think those are kind of obvious. But the idea is to do it to whatever your comfort level is. You have to be authentic when you talk to kids, because the minute you're not, they know. I don't know how sensitive that is at the elementary level. I'm fairly certain that the kids are sensitive to inauthenticity at the middle school level. I guarantee they know when you're not authentic at the high school.
I'll back that up and say I completely agree, and I would say that kids can sense authenticity from possibly even kindergarten. It's a different radar that they have. Do they know, do you love them or not? Are you there? Are you there for them? But that authenticity radar is there in kids K through 12. So
real quick, I would also say that, I think you bring up a good point of that line of how much to share too. Obviously changes with that grade level, but Ty, you may agree or disagree with me. I feel like more and more there is less that is off the table that I can share with kids to create those relationships. Obviously saying it in a classroom friendly way, But, if I'm going through a hard time, I can express that. Going into that authenticity that I feel like a few years ago, we've had conversations before. Maybe that authenticity, it was, iron pressed shirts and it was teaching just a few years ago. So,
I think you're right. And I think that, especially when I was a first year teacher, maybe it was harder to understand that line. Maybe I overstepped. Maybe I just had a principal who was not comfortable with teachers sharing parts of their lives, right? But I agree with what you're saying. I think there's clearly been a transition to be more accepting of that. And I think it's grounded in results. I think it, when you can, when you see that teachers who connect to their kids are more effective, how are you going to argue with that?
For sure. So we haven't had many chemistry teachers on. We've had a couple. We've had a couple high school science teachers, but a chemistry teacher is not sticking out in my memory. And if you're listening and you were on our show, I greatly apologize. So I know that you teach advanced chemistry as well as I guess academic chemistry or whatever you're going to teach. So I have a question that I want to ask, but only if it fits. So do you have students that have to enroll in your chemistry class, say academic chemistry, and then do you also have a advanced chemistry class where students are electing to take that because they have a strong interest in that?
Sure.
Is that accurate?
So that's accurate. I would just stick to calling them first year and second year.
Okay, perfect.
Chemistry or advanced, it really comes down to first year or second year.
Perfect. So what do you notice as a difference in terms of the level of engagement that you have from your students in the first year students that in theory are enrolled in your class versus the second year chemistry students that are electing to take your class? So what do you notice in terms of the difference of engagement of those students? And also, how are you instructing those groups different to raise the level of engagement, especially for that first year student who might not be interested in chemistry at all?
So for that first year class, I really do a lot more stress on like the conceptual basis for chemistry. And it's not that I don't ever do math, but if I relied on math to teach the chemistry in that first year, I would lose a vast majority of the kids, right? Even when I introduce the math, it's after we've made sure that conceptually we have a better idea of what we're talking about. And it's funny because like in that first year, I spend a chunk of time on quantum atomic structure, which sounds really complex and sounds really mathy, but we do it from the sense of kind of modeling or thinking about how systems are organized. We do it with the addition of phenomena. When students look at line emission spectra, and you can't justify that based on the orbiting model system, it makes it like they can. It's interesting when they can see that like science makes mistakes, and it uses that to move forward. And so I really put that concept of chemistry as a growing science and a changing science to kind of keep kids involved, rather than I'm presenting these are the facts of chemistry by making them by asking them and make them think about what's wrong with this model or what's wrong with this system or how does this not match what we see at the real world scale. Kind of makes kids interested. And so you're always going to have what you're asking me about is engagement, right? And there's always going to be kids who have so many things going on in their lives that one more class on top of it can be a struggle, especially if they don't see themselves in it. But I've had a couple of really fortunate years where word of mouth has gotten out that Mr. White's not so bad. He's not just mean all the time, and that there are fun things we do, fun things we talk about that I've had really good engagement. One of the things that I really stress to reinforce those kids in that first year too is how unfair this is. And oh man, kids love it when you acknowledge unfairness, right? But these guys have had English every year since kindergarten. They've had math every year since kindergarten. Why would we expect them to know or fully understand chemistry the first time they've ever seen it? And to acknowledge that, I'm giving them a different way of looking at the world. And that way is sometimes pretty abstract. So it is a challenge. How are we going to face that? What are we going to take out of it? The second year kids I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No. Please jump into the second year. I'd love to hear that comparison.
Like you said, the second year kids, that's elective, and so it's self-selected, and it's fun because it keeps becoming a bigger and bigger class. And some of the kids actually come there because now they're excited about something and they want the math. It's funny that I've had a lot of kids tell me that they sign up for that second year for the math because you're doing math in a way that's meaningful. Um, some of the kids come in there because they like the way we do class discussions. You asked about how I organize and how I engage, and there's a whole lot of Socratic discussion that I use. Not so much of what do you think is right or how do you, but do you understand this? What does this look like in your words? How well can you describe what you're taking out of this? So much of learning is built on our ability to visualize and perceive those words. And so giving the kids a chance to put it back into their own communication uh, has made it more meaningful for a lot of them.
So I could easily see a student in first year Mr. White's class having to take chemistry and thinking, I've hated science my entire life. Why would I like chemistry? And I'll use the Socratic discussions as an example. I love the idea of thinking for myself and kind of working through those higher order thinking questions and really feeling empowered, because I think teenagers love to feel like they know more than they actually do. If you can tap into that, right? That is the beauty of if you get them on a topic that they can get on a platform of. Interestingly, I would love to know what that kind of looks like in chemistry, but in that realm, they go into year 2 and they may have just loved having Mr. White. Do you feel like kids come into your room underprepared at all for year 2 just because they enjoyed your experience? Because I'm only speaking from my own example. I could love and want to follow a teacher even if I didn't have the skills. And that's kind of a double-edged sword of, or, I come down the line and I fall in love with chemistry and I choose to make that a part of my profession going forward.
So it's a fair question, and I absolutely get where it's coming from. I'm going to acknowledge a little bit of privilege I have teaching in a rural school. I am the only chemistry teacher, which means that every kid who signs up for Chemistry 2, I also have an idea of what their experience has been and where their strengths are, which means that I can also do a better job of differentiating that instruction for them in that second year. Now, that would probably be a lot more challenging if there was even another teacher splitting the chemistry load with me, right? But that's certainly an advantage that I've got here where I'm at right now. And it's,
what are some of your, go ahead, keep going.
Well, and it's fair to ask, like, are they underprepared? And the truth is, isn't most everyone who signs up for chemistry a little bit underprepared to start with? And I don't mean that personally. I mean the point that you've never taken it before, right? How do I teach 300 years? Like, this is the funny thing. Whether it's adults who grew up thinking, I learned chemistry in high school, or biology for that matter, or whether it's how do you think any of us was able to compress 300 years of chemistry into a 1-year class? You know what I mean? Like, there's no way to expect that any kid is really fully prepared for that second year. If that addresses the question, yeah.
Yeah. Can I ask a follow up? And Ken, maybe now working in secondary, you can kind of tap into this as well. One of the great responsibilities of an elementary school teacher is to teach very generally everything. And when you go into high school, in theory, a student is having someone who absolutely loves literature and ELA skills, someone who absolutely loves their science skills, their social studies, and hopefully that's portraying through their teaching. And whatever the students connect with the best, they go on and a lot of times start considering, hey, I saw myself have strength in this area or what have you. that's a bit of pressure to say Mr. White is a great chemistry teacher. I really connected with him, is my future in chemistry. Or, Mr. Ehrman was a great fifth grade teacher. That is my inspiration of what I want to be. I feel like that's a prevalent thing more in high school than it is even when you're witnessing kids that are fine chemistry students. I don't know if that even makes sense, but I feel like we witness, and you might be able to say you were a fine student. I wouldn't suggest you going in this field.
So I want to make sure that I'm hearing your question right, because when you look at the research around STEM education, most kids decide that they do not like science by middle school, 5th or 6th grade. And that's one of the challenges in high school, right? Is that these kids have already decided that science is not for them. Why do I have to be here? When am I ever going to use this stuff? And it's a big part of that identity is that it's not for me. I don't belong. Is that fair? And so what is our role as secondary in handling that? And so I really tried personally, I really tried to find ways to connect it to that, to them, to their experience. I got to do an interview with the Rural Scoop podcast, and I talked about this over there. I think it's a fun thing to share. When I came to Wilcox, I really was perceived as being an outsider. And part of that is because I moved here from teaching in South Phoenix, which is just culturally very different from where I'm at. And I can remember being frustrated at the way I was treated. And I remember being frustrated like I had these really great years at South Phoenix, and now we don't really think that I matter or I don't belong here. And I had a kid come in, and this was a big epiphany for me in a couple of ways. He comes in on a Monday, and he's like, guys, he goes, we spent all weekend having to flush the pivots, which is for agriculture, how we irrigate our crops around here. Having to flush the pivots and clean out where things were turning solid and plugging the lines. He's like, and that's double replacement reactions. That's what we're doing right now. And it was like exciting because this kid took what he learned in the classroom and connected it to his real world lived experience. It was exciting because that was a turning point in how the kids looked at me and talked to me and thought about what I was teaching them, because all of a sudden there was a little bit more relevance to it. But since then, I really made it a point of learning more. Like, what does STEM look like in agriculture? What are the things that I could be tapping into from their lived experience to make this more meaningful? And so there's times that when I'm teaching stoichiometry, instead of talking about atoms and molecules, we play with the livestock auction and how many cows would this be, converting mass to quantity, right? There's things that I've tried to do to make this more meaningful to their lives beyond the classroom. And I think that has been a big part of what's allowed me to make some of those connections with kids and to make it more meaningful. I'm going to give you another name right here. Someone you guys need to interview. Billy Green is the New York Teacher of the Year, and he's also a chemistry teacher. And we sat and talked about culturally relevant chemistry, where he could use the kids' lived experiences to teach simple ideas. And it's like, that's what I've been trying to do. Does that answer that second part of your question?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And
yeah, and just kind of adding, like, and to clarify, Ken, please chime in on this. It's just that idea of as kids near, I haven't thought about how influential high school teachers are to future careers. And so when you are able to bring relevance and when you are able to connect and see connections, that at that age, they're also having to consider what their next steps are. So are they considering chemistry or are they not because of their experience with it? And I just find that that's a pressure.
Yeah, and I also think it's an unnecessary pressure that high school teachers have, and I hope that it's slowly changing in the sense that 18-year-olds don't need to decide what they want to do for the rest of their life. our guest tonight, Ty, you're the perfect example of that, right? You figured it out as you experience different things. I had so many jobs. I did go right into college for teaching, but I have had a lot of different jobs that have had a direct impact on the person that I am today. And I think that I think sometimes, especially high school teachers, feel like they need to prepare their students to be chemists or to be calculus majors or to be, engineers. When in reality, the approach that I'm hearing from you, Ty, is one that is way more relevant for students. You're looking at it in a couple different. I'm perceiving this in a couple different perspectives. You're generating an interest in the topic in general. You are giving them confidence in those skills, and you're connecting it to what they see in their life. So when I think about things that I do on a daily basis, I am utilizing skills that I learned in school. I do a lot of renovations at my house. I just built a custom bench for our mudroom. I had to use a lot of freaking math to make this thing fit, especially because the space was not square. So I had to do a lot of thinking. I had to do a lot of measuring, finding the center line of the frame versus the center line of the finish ends. Like, a lot of thinking and math went into that I was tapping into skills that I've learned throughout my life as a student, and also as the skills that I taught in the classroom. And so I love how you're connecting your content to things that are happening in the community, because even if they don't pursue any science at all, there might be times where they have to use a scientific skill to solve a problem in their life. And I think that, when you look at especially things like physics, there's so much relevancy in physics that you use that you can use in your life from time to time. And sometimes I feel like if we use that frame as teachers, we can say, okay, what's relevant? What is a time that they might use this to figure something out, and how can I frame the content in that lens? So what are other activities that you're doing in your classroom where you are bringing in that cultural relevancy, local community relevancy, or just those real world applications?
Well, you might laugh at this, but I do a podcast activity that I get a kick out of, and the kids record. So I say podcast is kind of a hodgepodge of things, but when we talk about the historical development of the atom, right? A lot of the traditional teaching around that revolves around the physics and the discoveries that were taking place in England. You kind of start off with Antoine Lavoisier as the founder of chemistry, but then you get into like John Dalton from England was the first guy to propose the evidence behind the atomic theory, and J.J. Thomson was the British physicist that discovered the electron, and Ernest Rutherford, which it's funny, my kids really relate to this guy. Ernest Rutherford from New Zealand, but as a British scientist, discovered the nucleus. And I kind of go through with him, and we go through the models and the way that changes and the way science grows and the historical context in which this happens. Why is England the person leading all this research? Why aren't we talking about other countries? What was the advantage from a historical context that kind of made this happen there? So like you say, Ken, it's not that I'm just teaching kids about. It's not that I'm just teaching. It's not like my main focus for kids is teaching them just about careers, but sometimes just what is this world around us and how do we get here? How do we know the things that we believe to be true today, and what role science plays in that? But come the end of it, across this unit, I've assigned these kids, they get to pick which scientists they're going to research. And before we start this podcast activity, I do make clear that I'm not promoting racist science education. I'm not trying to just teach old white men, and that there's a historical context for how we've gotten to this point in the activity. But they go and record that podcast as the scientists. And they talk about what were their lives like? What things can these kids relate to in how those scientists got there and the challenges they face, and think about what that looks like in their own life. How does science get done in today's world? When you look at Lavoisier and Dalton, science was a gentleman's hobby. People paid for their own equipment versus Thompson and Rutherford were working on a university budget or government grants to fund research. And so that isn't the same as their lived experience exactly, but it gives them a bigger scope about when we talk about scientists today, how does that get done? Where does the funding for research today in the U.S. come from? Who pays for that? Why do they pay for that? Does that kind
of? Mm-hmm. No, that works.
I have this thing
Absolutely.
about going off on rabbit holes and sometimes forgetting where we started, right?
You're totally fine because
Nope.
I ask questions that don't always make sense. So you're a-okay.
Well, Matt, you know
Or
what?
sometimes he talks for a while and doesn't even ask a question,
Yeah,
but
that
thinks he did.
Matt, you said something I wanted to go back to because I heard Ken bring it up again, but this is definitely me chasing one of those rabbits. Is, you had the idea that in elementary you have this real general vague, we teach it all, and the idea that when you get to high school, as a chemistry teacher, I'm just focused on this narrow thing. Man, when you're inside this narrow thing, it's this wide. I talked to you guys before we started recording. I grew up in Globe. Chemistry meant metallurgy and extracting minerals out of the ground. And in Wilcox, chemistry means designing fertilizers and biochemical applications for plant growth or for animal nutrition. Um, was hugely passionate about genetics growing up. And before moving to Wilcox, I got the chance to start doing biotechnology as a teacher in the classroom. And we did that through the use of testing gene function. So, like my background in chemistry really focuses on the biochemistry applications. And when you get kids who want to follow like that quantum mechanics rabbit hole, I'm not prepared for that. That's not I can't teach all of chemistry, and there's no way we could get a kid to learn all of that. You know what I mean? So I just think it's funny because it's an interesting observation that's widely held. But when you're inside that, even that narrow area, there's still so much going on.
Well, to add to that, I I appreciate how you're talking about the responsibilities and especially in your situation that you are the only chemistry teacher in your district, so you are the authority, you are the law, you are everything for your school district when it comes to chemistry, and what you are strong at and what you emphasize is obviously what is going to be passed along through the students of your entire building that take your course. I guess the question I'd like to ask is how much do you feel like you find your chemistry instruction matching state or maybe national curriculum of chemistry, and how much do you think is maybe applied directly to your district and local area because of the agricultural and ecological features that make those connections for kids, like you're saying? Hey, look around. How do we see chemistry around us? How much are you allowing kids to have a better perspective of what that chemistry is in their environment compared to almost those national style standards of chemistry?
I should probably double check what those national style standards looks like, but to my understanding, right, the NGSS model and the Arizona standards are written so that you see a lot of that 3D, and so rather than, when I first designed that podcast activity, we had specific standards like students will describe the historical interaction between society and science and how they influence each other, and that was where I designed that out of. And now they're a lot more general, whether so that instead of saying you will teach the history leading up to the discovery of the atom, it's how do models change? It's a lot more generic so that you can teach different versions. You can teach the same idea, the same scientific concepts, a lot of different ways
Using an applicable model. Got it.
using an applicable and relevant model.
So you've mentioned a couple times about your background and interest in STEM. So I would love for you to define what you see as STEM, because I think this is a word that is at times just a buzzword for when students are doing anything that involves hands-on. So what you would define STEM as, and how you connect that to your chemistry class, which in theory, according to the acronym, would only be one letter of that
Right,
word.
right. So I'm going to be that jerk who oversimplifies the answers and says everything is STEM. But so if I start with, like you said, my room is specifically designed to be a science classroom. It's chemistry, the science of chemistry. And so I try to teach the kids that what science is really about is how we learn things, how we know things, how we evaluate the truth or the correctness of what we understand to be real. But how do you do that without technology? Right? And when we do hands-on activities, that's the thing I ask the kids to do. How would you develop new tech? I don't specifically say develop new technology, but I ask them the open questions that leads to kids often suggesting or proposing either equipment that exists that we don't have, or what the next type of equipment should look like. When I ask the kids to solve this problem or to figure out how to do the measurements to solve this problem, there's an engineering process, because we're not going to do it right the first time. And so iteratively, you need to figure out what your sources of error are and come back on that. So when we do, for example, I have this fun activity around density, and the kids have to do measurements of pieces of aluminum foil and calculate what the thickness of that foil is, both for regular and heavy duty. And so they figure out what are their sources of error. How do we fix that? Let's try it again. Let's see if our numbers come out closer to the accepted true value, right? And so by trying to incorporate as many of those different STEM aspects, like I'm teaching chemistry, but I'm also teaching that, like what I said, I define science as to begin with. How do we know what's correct? How do we define reliable information? How do we determine if information is reliable? And so there's parts of that. I'm sorry, now I opened myself up to another rabbit to chase. There's times when you say, how do we know it's reliable? That, yeah, we talk to each other in the class about what is a reliable source. How do you know if you're getting answers from a reliable source? But when it's the hands-on design too, okay, you've done this lab and you've told me this is the thickness of foil. How can you verify that that's a good answer? How can you tell if your numbers are reliable? Even without the accepted value, if you're seeing this big range of answers, you should identify that I'm not doing something right, or I'm not confident in these results. And so that's really a lot of what I want to do teaching the chemistry, is teaching kids to think critically about the things that they believe to be correct or true.
Which I think, Ken, and I'd almost be interested to see what is your definition if you were to add, because it is kind of a catch-all. How would you define or adjust definition at this current time of STEM?
So I do agree with what Ty said in terms of it's all learning. And I think it's looking at it's easy to say, well, this doesn't include ELA, but it's looking when you're looking at STEM, it's looking at the thinking processes that are involved. And it is that iterative process. It's the evaluation of what are you doing? Can you prove it's right? Can you prove it's wrong? Or can you prove it's reliable or unreliable? And using that mindset to approach what you're doing. So even, and I'll let you jump in, Ty, when I'm done, even looking at that from a writing process, right? Applying the design thinking process to a writing piece. When you finish writing, you're not done. It needs to be evaluated. What are your resources that you have to evaluate it? You have a teacher, you have peers, you have, parents or neighbors who might have a talent in writing. You bring the technology piece into it. You have Grammarly available that can make you sound like you have way better grammar than you actually do, which I benefit from on a daily basis. And even now with Chat GPT, you can submit a writing piece to Chat GPT and ask it to evaluate it with specific criteria. So, leveraging those skills and that thinking process, I think it's easiest to do it in relation to science and engineering tasks to build a capacity for it and for students to legitimately see the outcome. Because when you're doing a design challenge and you have a goal and you use the design thinking skills and you go through the plan, the build, the prototype, evaluate, rebuild, and you reach a goal or you work closer to that goal, you start to see how the thinking process creates benefit, and then you can apply that to other aspects of what you're teaching, what you're learning, and what you're doing. What did you want to jump in with, Ty?
Well, you guys put me in teacher mode, and so I had to say we don't use the word prove.
Okay.
Sorry.
I'll accept that.
You're right. Pedantry over here. To be clear, I wasn't sure, and I think I heard you answer this in your answer, but did you say this? You did not say that STEM does not include ELA, did you?
I'm saying if you look at the traditional acronym,
okay,
ELA can make the argument. I've heard it should be STEAM because it includes art. I've heard it all the way out to the phrase STREAMELA, which is to add reading and ELA into the conversation. And again, at that point, I would argue, okay, we're talking about learning.
Yeah, liberal arts, right?
Right, exactly.
Yeah, and you know what? I'm not exclusive to the idea of the arts in STEAM. I think that, for one thing, it's a better way of making sure everybody's included. You've got kids, but if that's the best way for them to participate, then they're participating. And let's face it, how many times do we have to go, whether it's to official and technical graphs or whether it's to just art pieces, to abstractly imagine something? You can't teach anything without art, and you can't communicate anything without art. And besides that, if we're being honest, how much of art is based on science and chemistry, especially? I love when I get to, there's been like 2 times in the last couple years, like they come up with new paint pigments. And I get excited about that. I mean, here's chemistry for people who really aren't interested in chemistry, right?
Absolutely. I guess to piggyback off, and I just want to add, the way that I think about it at this point is, honestly, most operations that we go through, most tasks that we have, we don't have teams like a big corporation where you have marketing and design and accounting. It's a one-stop shop. And I think STEM has become, at least in my elementary perspective, the idea of coming across a problem and recognizing you have to have good enough skills to handle any problem through the scientific process or lens. Ken and I are not great podcasters by any means, but the two of us put together the best product we can. And Ken, by being really the workhorse behind this, has learned a tremendous about a bunch of different skills because he didn't say no when he came across a problem. And I think that mindset, more than anything, okay, recognize I don't technically have the skill or background knowledge already, but I'm going to figure out a solution and get it 80% of the way there, is what, in my perspective, STEM really comes down to, which is leveraging what you have.
Well, it's a great attitude, because is there ever really 100% of any solution?
True.
If you never pull the trigger, nothing ever moves forward.
See, Ty,
and
in elementary school, we love these absolutes. So absolutely, for my 4th graders, they need to know. But you're right.
You know what? There was a question like that. I don't remember which one of you started to ask it earlier, but I really thought it was going to go down that road about one of the challenges. So I am a Noyce Master Teacher Fellow, and that means that, like it's an NSF-funded grant, we develop PDs to help teachers at different levels. Mostly it was designed, I believe, to help new teachers, but we have all sorts of teachers that come to our PD sessions. And one of the big challenges, and there's 2 here, I hope I don't forget one while I talk about the other one, is you have a lot of elementary teachers who don't really get much training in what science is or what STEM is. And that makes them hesitant to teach science or to make it a part of their classroom path. And the I'd say the best thing going for you in this sense, Matt, right, is neither do your kids. And so you don't have to know everything. If you set out to solve a problem with them and they build understanding as they go along, they're engaging in science. Right? And the other part of I thought about where that question was going was that it was going towards having to give up that control. We recognize that it's not effective teaching practices to be the sage on the stage all the time. And that doesn't mean that there aren't times that you've got expertise. Like there's certainly still times that you've got expertise that needs to be imparted, but relinquishing enough control that your kids are comfortable to ask questions and then to admit, well, I don't know the answer to that. I'd love to help you look into it further, which was something I pulled out of a Carl Sagan reading one time that I think has informed what my classroom practice looks like. But I think it would make it easier for people wanting to teach those concepts of science ongoing rather than just every principle in chemistry.
I love that, and I even find that with my own son now. He's close to turning 5, and he's asking me wild questions from things he hears at school or a book he reads. And my natural instinct is to start to answer the question, and I find myself very, very often stopping myself and saying, "You know what? I actually don't know the answer to this." And so we turn. A lot of times we're standing around in the kitchen in the family room, and Alexa's right there. So we start with Alexa. Let's see what Alexa gives us, and then can I interpret that and explain it to him? Or then sometimes we're jumping on and we're watching a video or we're looking at pictures or reading a little bit more to discover that together. So this is actually right where I wanted to transition into, because I know you do a lot of empowering your students as leaders. So after you respond with that follow-up question, I'm not sure, I would love to help you look into that more. What are you doing after that? Or just in general, what are your strategies to allow your students to become empowered leaders in your classroom, to walk down or to go down rabbit holes and to discover information that they're interested in? Like, what are the key strategies that you use that other teachers can apply to their own classrooms?
So I don't know if this directly applies, but it's something I do. And I think at this point, my kids laugh at me when I do it because they know it's coming. Sounds like a great science fair project. Right? Like, let's figure out how to answer that. And sometimes it comes down to, well, they just need something that I don't know yet, and we find where that's been done. Everything I teach is open for debate. And I know there's teachers who don't agree with me on this. In that first couple of years, I want to say it was about the third year that I had come to Wilcox. And so I was still really kind of being resisted a little bit, right? I had a kid who brought in, he says, well, you brought up climate change yesterday, and you said that we can debate everything. So here I am, and I have my resources. And he pulled out the pages he'd printed at the library. And so that's my open invitation, right? Everything is open for debate. And if you think that I'm telling you something wrong, let's look through the evidence. And so in that scenario, it turned into me having to also show this kid to look up who the Heritage Foundation is and why maybe they weren't the most reliable source of information to be using for climate change research, what their conflicts of interest were, where their funding comes from, things like that. And it was really funny because the kid took that really well. Obviously, he came in with a set of beliefs, and he knew that I was going to let him speak and share his thing. And I wasn't attacking him, and I also wasn't attacking the Heritage Foundation ad hominem, right? We were looking at what the conflicts were that would cause their research to be considered biased. And it made a big impact on a number of things, on what the kid understood, on how the kid evaluated information moving forward, but also on his buy-in to my class. Because after that, he became a really bought-in kind of student. He knew that he would have that opportunity to kind of speak out on what his own ideas were, and that I was going to evaluate his arguments on what the evidence for that was, as science should be done. I've had other kids who want to take me up on that. We want to have discussions about evolution. We want to have all those controversial things that shouldn't be. But by kids knowing that I'm going to listen to them and respect what they've got to say, even if I have to show them where mistakes are being made or how to change their research skills, right? They know that they've it's been learned, it's been seen and demonstrated over and over that they have that voice in my room. I mean, I don't know that what I'm saying, whether that's generalizable. I don't know if you, but to me, that's been one of my most effective tools, is letting kids see that when I say I don't know, I'd love to help you find it, or if you don't agree, like bring in your evidence, let's debate. That's been an effective tool for me.
Mm-hmm. Well, it empowers them to believe that you're not just saying, yeah, you can be self-directed in this classroom. You're fulfilling those opportunities, and I think that's important to capitalize on. Matt, do you want to add anything? Go ahead, Ty.
No, I appreciate that validation. Like that, it's interesting because we've had this debate, that exact debate, in my Scene for Inteta's work this year. We're reading the book Disinformation about climate change, how climate change is taught. Sorry, as I look down, it's right in my backpack, right? And so we're reading this book, and I had shared that experience as a teacher. That it's frustrating because the science clearly says this, and I teach science, right? So kids should just. But when you say you just have to accept it because that's how it is, well, now you've made it a lesson from authority, which isn't how science is done in the first place. So even if you've made a kid believe something, which that's not necessarily the most effective way to change someone's mind, right? You've also lost that opportunity to teach what science is and how it gets done. It's tiresome to have to end up debating some of these topics after a while, but when you go through that, I feel like it just makes your classroom it makes my science classroom a stronger science classroom.
Well, I think that goes back to, and I'm sure that your perspective through these open door policies to, bring your research, let's have a conversation about real topics, also is not Mr. White trying to be the authority and changing everyone's perspective. If anything, it's the idea of it's an open forum. Let's strengthen arguments and perspectives and beliefs, but also model how we can have discord appropriately.
Yeah, right. Critical debate in a way that's not built on the ad hominems, right? That's one of the funny stories that comes up in that podcast. Niels Bohr is our closing scientist on that. He's our most recent and the kids come back. This guy used to argue with Einstein. At the Solvay conferences, Niels Bohr and Albert Einstein would get into these heated debates about what conclusions should be taken from the evidence, and then go have lunch together. Because they weren't attacking each other, right? They were arguing ideas.
Right. Which is probably seems so foreign to students, especially with the culture of politics and debate today. And even the things that I listen to and read in science, there's so much of that is not based on hard evidence. It becomes a ideological battle instead of a scientific battle. So I would love to continue this conversation, but I want to be cognizant of our time. So we're going to wrap things up here, and we are going to throw our exit ticket questions at you, which are the same 4 questions we ask every guest every week. Question number 1, what is the best thing a teacher can do to make a student's school experience better?
They have to get to know that student. I mean, being seen is a powerful tool, and it does so much for a student to feel safe, to feel like they belong, to feel like they're wanted in that environment. That's what you have to do to make their experience better. If you can't get to know and see your students for who they are, then everyone is just a blob. I mean, what is that experience like?
Couldn't agree more. What is a piece of advice you might consider your best piece of advice that you've received? Could be from a colleague, maybe a supervisor, or even a student.
So while I was in South Phoenix, the gentleman who ran our special ed program pulled me aside, and he made the comment to me that you're not teaching those kids with A's, right? Whether they're coming from such privilege at home that they just do, those kids are going to do well without you. Like whoever their teacher is, they're going to do well. You're teaching those kids who are struggling to get through every day. You're teaching those kids who aren't passionate about chemistry. Those are the ones you have to reach. And like it, I never intentionally meant to leave people out, right? No one has that in their heart when they become a teacher. But it made me more aware of the need to step beyond my own comfort zone and reach out for those kids that were slipping through cracks.
Wow. That is awesome, especially in a specified area. It's probably pretty convenient to lean into those A's where you can have these high level conversations about a subject area you love.
They're kids who acting like they're passionate about what you're passionate about, right?
Yep.
And so, yeah, that's exactly the way to look at it. But those are not the kids.
That's wild. So this is more of a for you question than for students, but we all as educators recognize that there are waves of positive moments and challenging moments, days, possibly weeks we struggle to survive. If there's an educator out there going through one of those moments where they are in struggle, what is something you can share with them to power up through those moments?
School can be frustrating, right? My gosh, the kids are mean and they pick on you, and there's so many demands, and make sure that you stay strong with what your life is beyond the school. Being a teacher becomes such a huge part of the identities we build for ourselves. And you can't forget to take your own time into who you are, remembering who you are, not just why you got into this profession, but who you are. What are the things you're passionate about? And to pursue that. Stay connected with your family. Stay connected with those hobbies that make you. Without your own background beyond being a teacher, you lose that interest. You lose the passion for living, but you also. Sorry, I'm saying this all backwards. Those passions are what make you unique and special, and they're what make you appealing to your kids as well. So don't forget to just be yourself.
Simple.
I really
Simple,
love that.
but accurate.
If Probably better if I'd have said it right the first time.
Still effective.
So it's easy to fall into facilitating a repetitive classroom. What do you think separates the teachers who are the ones constantly seeking to change, innovate, and adopt new teaching strategies to break free from that repetitive classroom?
Part of it is just what we were saying about there. Like, you have to be charged up and comfortable in who you are, because taking a risk is scary, right? And so, you're right that it's easy to fall into, but I think that so many people that get into that habit, it's because it is so scary to take on a new challenge, and it's scary to relinquish control, and it's scary to step out from the front stage where I can direct my classroom and you do this my way, and to step to the side and let that creative chaos take over. I think that's the biggest part of it, is just that fear of what's it going to look like in my class, and how am I going to handle that? What are my responsibilities? What should my role be when that happens?
And we are all so good with dealing with creative chaos. That lack of control is just second nature to us. Unfortunately, not necessarily the case.
I think it's funny, because I think for some people that's really what holds them back, what holds them in the traditional model of teacher student. And man, that chaos is what makes it exciting, right? What you said, it's repetitive to stand in front of the class and I want you to take notes and copy down everything I say because I'm so important. And yet, when you can see that chaos engage kids and power them up and get them excited about what's going on, it becomes in my experience, it becomes a more rewarding classroom.
Well, I would even say, Ken, I don't know if you have a feeling this way too. I kind of feel like when you are okay with that creative chaos, we often say that that's the most memorable things for kids, but that's also so many times I leave reflecting on the classroom experiences and the light bulbs going off that I am sharing with my family and friends. As it almost sounds counterintuitive. I feel like I did less, but I even experienced more.
I think that's a good way to put it. I know you were directing that, Ken, but it's funny. It feels like when you're letting that chaos go, it feels like I haven't done anything, and yet I know my kids come out richer for it. I know it in the way they write. I know it in the way they explain. It's clear in the way that they respond that it's more powerful for them.
I'm going to get behind it, Matt, because that's what my classroom was like almost on a daily basis, and it was addicting. It was absolutely addicting when you could see the success and you could see ways to build momentum. And one of my favorite things was when other adults would come into my classroom and say two things. One, even my principal, who in theory knew my schedule, would always say, "What class is this? What subject is this?" And two, when other adults like superintendents, assistant superintendents, supervisors that were not in the building on a daily basis would come in and ask, what are your kids working on right now? I would say, go talk to them. Don't talk to me. And they would always come back and say, I can't believe the conversation I just had with a fifth grader, in the way they were able to explain what they're doing, what they're working on, the problems they're having, and it comes from that creative chaos. And right now we're doing a design challenge across the district. I'm doing with another coach where we're going to any kindergarten through fifth grade classroom. We're using a product called Strawbees. It's a fantastic product. If you never saw it, I thought it was a complete sham because it's literally straws and plastic connectors to build, but the connectors really are quality and you can build really cool stuff with it. And we're doing a simple challenge to build the tallest freestanding tower you can build. And we're making it a K through 5 competition. What we're doing is we're giving a big piece of paper for the K1 classes and a smaller piece of paper for 2, 3, and a smaller piece of paper for 4, 5. And the only restriction is the tower, the base has to fit on that paper. So we've kind of found a way to level the playing field. We had a class today of third graders build a 93-inch tower in 30 minutes. And they had literally never used the Strawbees ever before. And it came from the chaos. I showed them, this is how you connect them. And I gave them activity, try to build a pyramid or a rectangular prism. They did that, and then boom, they go into it. And it just comes from giving those students the opportunity and embracing that and understanding that some groups are only going to get a tower that's like 20 inches tall, but that's okay because they figured it out, and other ones are going to excel. And I'm going to go to a class tomorrow, and I'm going to show them this is the record to beat. And I'm going to have a lot of classes that nobody beats it, and that's okay because they're trying and they're going through that process. So it's I'm right there with you, and I love hearing how it's applying to high school classrooms as well.
Do you mind if I plug another design competition? Because I get excited about it the same way. So I launched a nonprofit 501c3 industry simulation education, but we do a space settlement design. So sometimes you're building a habitat on the moon. Sometimes there's a 5-year cycle so that kids don't ever see the same challenge, right? But I bring in aerospace engineers and they work with these students to design their habitat. And at the end of whatever their allotted time is, usually it's 24 hours. The international one is, I believe, 48, 60 hours, something like that. And they have to present it to a panel of judges. And so, it's tough that you end up having to select a winner, but it's exciting to do these challenges just like your straw thing, because there's no right answer. Sorry, Matt, against that elementary point of view, right? There is no right way to design this habitat. Plenty of wrong ways, but that creativity allows for the kids to build something beyond anything you could have ever taught them. It goes way past that, and they're excited about it, and it's wild because you bring in people to see this from the outside. And how are these kids working this hard after 12 hours? How are they still going? But it's exciting when the kids have that empowerment, that option, that buy-in, that voice in what they're working on.
Well, and I truly believe it comes from that chaos piece, because we're not going in and teaching these kids this is how you build strong towers. All we're doing is showing them literally this is how you connect the straws to the connectors. Here's the way to make it strongest. Here's how you connect the connectors together. Try building a box or a pyramid. Here's your challenge. That's all the instruction that's happening, because they have, and that's what's motivating them, is because they want to figure it out. They want to be creative. And there's frustrations that you have to support the kids and scaffold those frustrations. But those are all positive learning experiences, and it's just good for them to experience.
It does so much to teach, like the resilience, right? You can't set out to teach resilience in a standard classroom unless you create opportunities for failure. And in fairness, to be clear, my space element is an extracurricular program. It's not in my classroom. But it's funny because that's one of the funniest things when my kids write their lab reports is they seem to somehow always forget that I let them make mistakes. And I let them fail, and they have to figure out what those errors are and how to fix it.
Sounds like real learning. Yeah. So, Ty, I mean, I know we can speak for ourselves. We've enjoyed this conversation, and it sounds like you just have so much to give to others. Is there a way for our audience to connect with you and continue learning and maybe explore some of the other ideas you bring to education?
So I am learning to be better at social media. I really have not done a good job at it over the years, and I've got kids now teaching me to be better. You can follow me on Twitter at Roper Cowboy in AZ, and we have a website for the nonprofit I just mentioned. It's insimeducation.com. All the social media for that account is also listed on the right-hand margin.
Excellent. So we will link up to both of those in our show notes page, which can be found wherever you're listening to this or watching this on YouTube. All those links are below, as well on our show notes page, which is on our website at powereduup.com. So Ty, thank you so much. This has been an awesome conversation. I love your passion. I love your desire, not only for your subject area, but for bringing relevancy to students and empowering those students in your classroom. So you are clearly a gift to your district as well as your state. So thank you for that. And just keep doing what you're doing to continue to empower education and to bring a positive light to education. So Ty, thanks again for your time. And Matt, why don't you take us on out of here?
Guys, I appreciate it. This was a ball. And I would love to share you guys with more of my 2023 Teachers of the Year cohort.
That's wonderful.
Absolutely. We would love to have
we are sad to see this one go, but as we power down this episode, without a doubt, Ty, you left us feeling powered up. So have a great week, and everyone will look forward to the conversation time. Talk to you then.
Thank you so much for listening to this podcast. If you haven't already, please subscribe on whichever platform you're listening to or watching us on YouTube. Each week we get to talk to amazing educators who are making a positive impact on the lives of students, their colleagues, administrators, and education as a whole. It's been such a privilege every week to be able to talk to these incredible individuals, learn from them, grow with them, and better myself and all of education through these conversations. If you haven't already, please consider sharing this with a colleague, someone who can benefit and be powered up from the experience of listening to these incredible conversations. Because of Powered Up, we are powering education by empowering you.